Welcome to the 340Banter podcast. In today's episode, Chelsea and I are joined by Derek Pihl, the Chief Pharmacy Officer at Salina Family Healthcare in Kansas. We will be discussing his advocacy efforts both at the state and national level. It's important to note that these are his personal views, not those of his employer. So Derek, I know you've been involved in a lot of advocacy efforts across Kansas and even on the federal level. So tell us a little bit about how you got involved in advocacy and how you've really made that that transition, because pharmacy doesn't actually generally lead you in that direction. So what kind of took you that way?
Yeah. Well, first of all, thank you for having me on the podcast. I actually had some exposure to advocacy pretty early on. I worked at a small independent pharmacy in Lindsborg, Kansas, which is where I went to pre-pharmacy at Bethany College. And the independent pharmacy owners that I worked for, Bob Nyquist and his wife, Janie, were very involved with advocacy. I remember being in the background filling prescriptions, and they were constantly calling and speaking to their representatives and senators about priorities. And at the time, I remember thinking like, wow, they spend a lot of time doing this. But so that kind of just sat in the back of my experience there.
It's super unique for pharmacists because pharmacists are typically like the quiet, sit in the background, do the work behind the curtain.
Right.
No, they were out and telling their story.
I've seen that from independent pharmacists, though. I think they realize that their business really relies on favorable laws. So I think that's where that connection really fits.
That makes sense.
Yeah. No, I totally agree. And I mean, it continues to be more and more important. But then I went to pharmacy school, and at the time I had expected. I went to pharmacy school with the intention of owning my own pharmacy one day. So I became NCPA chapter president at pharmacy school, and we just got involved with advocacy kind of on a student level. I remember going to a fly-in in DC as a student. So again, I kind of had those couple experiences, but then when I actually graduated pharmacy school and became a true pharmacist, it actually kind of went dormant for like the first 10 years of my career. Until I actually found the health center world, and then slowly got into it again through that. That's really what led me to getting into advocacy.
And 340B hasn't been dull the last 5 years, but for sure.
Definitely
No, it's certainly, actually it started more like self-preservation, trying to figure out like, what in the heck am I doing, this whole 340B thing, and, asking questions. And then it just kind of, the more, we always talk about 340B being an onion, the more I peeled back, the more I realized, my gosh, there's a lot of things here that we need to be communicating about and trying to figure out. And that just kind of led into advocacy.
I've decided it's more like a jumbo jawbreaker at this point, with because all the layers are really hard and it's not fun.
Yeah.
Not fun to peel the layers back.
That is absolutely the truth. It doesn't just make you cry. It actually, causes you pain when you
yes, exactly.
So I know you were working with the state to do some contract pharmacy restrictions, and Kansas has been kind of unique. So tell us a little bit about what that looked like in your state.
Yeah. So a few years ago, we tried to do a PBM type of legislation to stop discriminatory contracting, and that didn't go anywhere. But I did get the experience of testifying on the state level, so that was good experience. But then we decided to try for a contract pharmacy access bill, and so. Not this last legislative session, but the year before that, one was introduced, And we were kind of told, hey, don't expect it to go anywhere. It's probably just going to just sit in the committee and not get a hearing. And that ended up being the case. But we actually had one Kansas health center CEO who was bound determined to get this to go somewhere. And he really pushed it and pushed it. And towards the end of the legislative session, they actually did, they got it into the budget process. And so it passed as a 2-year, essentially a pause on contract pharmacy restrictions. But unfortunately, it just didn't have any teeth to it. And so it really didn't do us any good. I say that actually, that's not the truth. There were manufacturers who immediately stopped their restriction policies.
You've still got about half a dozen at least.
Yeah, there are still some.
Yeah.
So it did actually have a definitely an impact. But of course, as we know, there were manufacturers that sued over that, and our attorney general actually came out and essentially said that this law doesn't require anything of the manufacturers the way it was written, and so then several of them did back off. And so then this last legislative session, we went back to work and decided, okay, well, let's get one out there that truly goes through the process and has the true enforcement mechanisms that we need around it. And so that did get a hearing on the Senate side at the very end of the legislative calendar this last year, and we successfully got it passed on the Senate side. Unfortunately, it just didn't have enough time on the House side, and House leadership is not supportive of it, so we have some work to do. But thankfully, Kansas works on a 2-year legislative session, so odd years are the first of the legislative session. So because we got it in 2025 through the Senate side, in 2026, we actually get credit for that. We just need to work on the House side. So that's going to be the big lift here coming up.
That's a great point for anyone getting involved in advocacy, is that each state has a different legislative calendar. So some, it's only like 2 months and then it's done for the year. Or in the case of Texas, they're every other year. So it gets really challenging. Luckily, in some states like Ohio, we have a full-time legislature. So at any point during the 2 years, bills could go through, but we haven't quite gotten there as of the time of recording. I'm hoping by the time this airs, Ohio's crossed that line as well.
So, and you spoke about being able to kind of testify at the state level. I know one of the biggest challenges around 340B is that because it's so complex and there are so many layers to it, it's really challenging to understand the nuts and bolts of it, to be able to make decisions, from the lawmakers' perspectives. What points did you find most successful in trying to distill, this really complicated concept down to what the program is, what its intent is, and what the impact that's happening?
Yeah. So that actually is a perfect segue into kind of talking about why our PBM legislation didn't work. We went into that and really leaned into the idea that it's a super complex program. We had experts that spent a whole day educating the committee on that, and quite frankly, we exhausted them. I mean, I think it actually, we figured out it actually was a detriment to our cause. I mean, by the time they had this whole day, they were just glassy-eyed and just like, this is complicated. And that's
like sitting through 340B University. Yeah. No matter how many times you've gone through it, at the end of the day, you feel like you've been hit by a train.
Yeah,
with a lot of information at once.
It is just so much information. But yeah, that fed right into our opponent's strategy, because all they had to do was plant this doubt in our legislators' mind of, wait a minute, this is so complex. if we change something, what do we not know that this is going to affect? And then, of course, they're worried about the political ramifications. Well, if I step on this, political landmine, what is that going to do? And so this time, when we went into the contract pharmacy bill, we actually leaned into the fact of, you're going to hear that this program is so complicated, but let us tell you the basics of why this is important. This is important to independent pharmacy in our state. This is important to your constituents being able to have access to care. And so we really got it down to the points of what this would do for people of Kansas and for businesses and healthcare in general, and tried to just get them to not focus on the minutia and the craziness of everything with 340B and, potential 340, political ramifications and things.
Interesting.
I think one of the neatest things about health center is that we do get into those situations where we're put into advocacy positions, even if it's not in our job title. So you mentioned testifying, and that's something I've done. But it's pretty scary for a lot of people. So what kind of advice would you give somebody that's new to it, that doesn't have that, maybe is a pharmacist or a pharmacy technician or somebody working in the 340B program? What advice would you give to somebody before they go to do their testimony?
Yeah, first of all, it's like anything, right? You are nervous for anything you haven't done. I was nervous to be on a podcast this morning. I've never been on a podcast. I was super nervous the first time I testified. So there's nothing that can replace experience. What they will realize is that the room you're going to be in is a committee room. It's not like you're in front of the entire chamber. So first of all, you're only in front of a few people. And they have to remember that they know likely way more than anybody else in that room. And so you can be worried about, well, what kind of questions are going to come up that I may or may not be able to answer. But I would tell people, don't worry about that. You can always say, I can get that information for you if you don't know off the top of your head. But I would say, just focus on what you know and what you're comfortable with. I would also say, stick to some of the higher level points in testimony. A lot of the work is really done behind the scenes, really with talking about the specifics about, what this does and how this affects things, but speak in general terms. And in some ways, maybe this sounds bad, but you're really there just not to screw it up, right? A lot of times, the background work has been done, and you're going to do more work with the legislators one-on-one. But you are there just to not say something that all of a sudden becomes the headline for the other side.
And I think one way you can do that is relate it back to your patients. Tell a patient story. Because those are the things that are really going to relate. And from my experience with, especially with the state legislature, they tend to be very easy on the constituents that come and testify. They're a little harder on the lobbyist, but they're being paid to do that. So they really just want to hear your story.
I think, what I've heard you say too is knowing their priorities, the panel that you're presenting to, because patient stories are incredibly impactful, but there are definitely instances where that almost, people can perceive that as you trying to detract away from facts by kind of trying to pull at the emotional aspect of it. So find out what your audience is in there for, what their driving force is behind looking at this legislation, and then speaking to those points and how the 340B program ties into what their priorities are.
Yeah, one of the ways you can do that, look and see what committees that each of those legislators are on. I was doing some advocacy for our primary care association a few months ago, and I just went through, and when I went to talk to a legislator, I looked and saw what committees they were on. One of them was on a workforce committee. So I talked about how 340B really helps increase the opportunities for employment in rural Ohio, and the fact that we actually had to go through a reduction of force at my health center because of 340B cuts. So it's not that you're changing your message, you're just tailoring it to the audience. And there's so many ways that 340B interacts with a health center or another covered entities program that you can tailor the story to the different audience.
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, like with Kansas, we really focused on the business aspect of things, especially the community pharmacies. And I couldn't agree more about starting with a patient story and then tying that into how that affects other things. But I think, yeah, that's great.
I want to pivot us a little bit from kind of the state advocacy efforts to a more unique experience you've been able to have in working on the 340B working table. And I know you can't speak to specifics of what you discussed, but I wonder if you could share with us what that experience has been like.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's been an incredible experience. The working table group, just to kind of level set a little bit, was started with a health center, a hospital system, and one manufacturer. And they originally came together with the thought of trying to tackle the contract pharmacy issue. That was really the main thing. And quite frankly, when they started talking about some of the other aspects like patient definition and things like that, they quickly realized, wow, this is going to be really tough. So they kind of tried to just avoid that. Well, with some of the more recent things that have happened that you can certainly read in the headlines, it quickly...
Today, yesterday, last week?
Yeah, you name it, it's there. They quickly realized, hey, we're going to have to tackle more than this. But about that time, the hospital group is from South Dakota, so they had a really good relationship with Senator Thune at the time, who was on the Gang of Six, the working bipartisan group in the Senate. And so they started looking at, well, how can we strategically expand? And with Jerry Moran, the senator from Kansas, being one of the six, I got asked to see if I would have interest in that. And so I got the opportunity to go to DC and sit with the small group. And I remember telling them a joke based in truth that when the whole contract pharmacy restriction stuff was starting, I just remember being so frustrated and thinking, like, why don't they just take multiple stakeholders and lock them in a room and just, like, you can't come out until you figure this out. And so I was telling them, I never in a million years thought I was going to be in that room. I just wanted to, but so that was interesting. But right away I felt some optimism because this wasn't trade group led. These were stakeholders that made a voluntary decision that they wanted to come together and try to talk out 340B issues. And I knew right away this was something I wanted to be involved with. Like you said, there is only so much I can discuss. The cornerstone of what we do is based around trust. And so, I won't really talk about policies and things like that, but I will say we've continued to grow. We have a great group. We continued to work with the Gang of Six. But before we would go to them, we would truly sit around a table and discuss and try to find consensus on certain topics. And I liked that it was consensus. It wasn't like we voted and majority rules. It was truly like, we will keep talking this out until we all are like, okay.
We found a point of commonality.
Right.
Yeah,
so
no one's entirely happy. No one's entirely mad.
Absolutely.
It's a true compromise.
Yeah. So Josh Trent, who is CEO of Levitt Partners, they really are they lead us through these discussions. He often says, look, nobody's going to get everything they want, but everybody should get what they need. And so that's really the perspective we all try to come from, is that, hey, we aren't gonna, I can have my personal thoughts and desires of the way I wish that everything would work out, but I have to be realistic that, hey, what can I absolutely not live with, and what can, we can probably make this work, sort of thing. So that has been great. It has been good for me to see how hospitals interact with the program, how manufacturers interact with the program. when you read a book and there's a character in your head, you kind of assign like a visual in your head, and this is horrible for me to say, but like drug manufacturer lobbyists, I almost had like this like car salesman, like greasy type of thing, and that's not. And I got to know these people, and they're wonderful, and they are doing a job, and
you're able to, like, as frustrating as I'm sure it could be at times, like better understand their perspective, their motivation, and kind of going into some of the conversations.
Yeah. I didn't. I'll just give an example. We have a common. I don't want to say foe, but like entity that hurts us both, and that's PBMs.
The enemy of my enemy is my friend.
And it is amazing to me. I didn't. I always thought, like, especially with like stacked rebates that aren't absolutely mandated by the program, like Medicaid rebates are. Well, why doesn't the manufacturer just? I mean, they are in control of that ultimately. Like they could just say no. And what I came to find out is that's not. I mean, that is just not an option. That would be suicide for
then
their
company.
Drugs
wouldn't be covered.
Absolutely,
by the payers. Yeah.
And to speak about the just the control and leverage that the PBMs have over them was. I found that to be very enlightening.
Last year I heard, I didn't know this, that the PBM lobby is actually larger than the pharmaceutical manufacturer lobby in Washington. So it's a lot of power, and it puts the manufacturers in a bad place. They really have to give these rebates to the PBMs, or their products aren't going to be, they're not going to move at all.
Right. So when we talk about the pressures that they have, I mean, you can talk about how, well, they're only Medicaid rebates are the statutorily prohibited rebates, but then you have to face reality, and the reality is that they have these pricing pressures all over, and so you have to work with what's truly realistic.
Yeah, I think it's great to work with those other entities to really see where they're coming from. We did something similar, working with NAC and a manufacturer talking about Inflation Reduction Act. I mean, we have a lot of commonality with them, but it seems like you don't until you sit down and you talk through some things and you see where they're coming from, and it makes it, even if you don't come to an agreement, it makes us better skilled at knowing how to frame our discussion and our argument points, and because we know where they're coming from, and we can adjust to make it work.
And it's a little bit easier to find that point of commonality and come to a consensus, in some areas, because you better understand both sides. You can kind of empathize with. And
we can find areas that we can give. And maybe that's down the road. Maybe that's transparency. I know covered entities, we want to do the right thing with the program. It's just, how is that information going to be used, and how the workload in getting that, how much work is it going to be for the covered entity?
How does it not turn into discriminatory PBM contracting?
Yeah. So it's, I think there can be a path, and I think the bipartisan working group in the Senate is a great way. From what we saw from the last Congress, they were probably, their proposed bill that never came out was probably the most accepted among all stakeholders of anything that came out last Congress. So I'm excited to see what they'll work on in this Congress, and if we can see anything move. It's a little tricky with the politics of it and the small Republican majority, but I think working in a bipartisan fashion is the way we find a solution.
Yep, totally agree.
Well, thank you both for all the work that you've done to continue the 340B program and continue the good fight. Thank you, Derek, for joining us today, and thank you both for not using the phrase "how the sausage is made" at any point in this discussion. I very much appreciate it.
I do love some Hamilton, so it was a struggle.
Fair. That's fair. All right. Well, thanks, guys.
Thank you.